Good evening, my friends. Welcome to this evening's live stream presentation here on the Tattooed Historian's Facebook and YouTube channel. Thank you so much for being here. My name is John. I am the Tattooed Historian, and tonight, the title of our presentation tonight is A Doorway to Heroism, a decorated German Jewish soldier who became an American hero. The book dropped on September 1st, the anniversary of the beginning of the Second World War, and I'm so delighted to have my friend Rabbi W. Jack Romberg on with us this evening. Jack, how are you?
Great. Nice to be with you, John.
It's great to have you on, my friend. Jack is retired as Rabbi of the Temple Israel in Tallahassee, Florida. He retired in the summer of 2019. It was his second career. In 1995, he decided to pursue the lifelong dream to be a rabbi, entering Hebrew Union College, Jewish Institute of Religion in 1996. Earning a master's degree in 1999 and ordained in 2001. Before retiring, Rabbi Romberg decided to write the book on his great uncle, Richard Stern, perhaps forming a third career and a speaking tour on that, which we'll talk about later. Rabbi Romberg's book details the life of his uncle, and he was awarded the Iron Cross in the First World War, defied the Nazis in 1933, which we will go over, and later joined the U.S. Army at the young age of 43. And as a 40-year-old, I can say that's amazing, because I would not be in good enough shape to do that. So good on him. Jack, thank you again for being here. It was just really a pleasure. And we had you on before, and we were talking about the final stages of this book coming about, and we're finally here where it is out to the public.
Yes, like you said, it was published on September 1st officially, and there were very, very good, pre-orders by a number of people, and I've been getting a number of calls and so forth for speaking and whatnot. I just hope this pandemic fades away sometime soon so that I can actually go and speak, in person in a number of places.
Yes, we've all been, really hoping that we can be in person again, just so we can see people and be around people who have common interests and
100%
be a community again, like the old days.
Yes, indeed.
It feels like the old days now, but it's been far too long. Jack, how long did it take you to write the book?
Well, including research and going through documentary, I would say that I started working on it probably back in 2017, because that's when I actually got all of Uncle Richard's documents that Dad had, kept for so many years. Dad died in 2008, and in 2017, Mom was selling her house, and she was going to throw out boxes of stuff. And I said, no, don't throw anything out until I go through it. And when I went through them, I found a box with all of Uncle Richard's documents. I found piles of letters that he had written to people or were written to him. And I found albums that Dad put together of the Stern family and his family going back to the early 20th century. So I realized at that point I had to get this thing done, because I knew a bit about Uncle Richard already at that point from discussions with Dad. But having all of the information, and then having made good connections in Germany over the years, I realized that between reading the appropriate books, studying the documentary, the documents and the letters that Uncle Richard wrote, and getting over to Germany and doing studying there, would give me the things needed to get this book together.
What was the highlight of your research process? Was it
I would say, well,
the
the highlight was my time in Germany, because as we'll see in just a few minutes, there's a picture of Uncle Richard that actually is in a number of museums all over Germany. And when I went to a number of these places and started to do research with historians and archivists, for example, in Cologne and in Weilerswist, they were blown away that a family member connected to Richard Stern was still alive, and that they could actually meet with him. So that was just a wonderful, gift to me. I felt, it was just wonderful to get their positive feelings. And I was so moved by how wonderful these people in Germany were, how moved they were, by this, and how dedicated they were to then helping me with the research beyond my time in Germany. They kept sending me things that I would need. They would stay in touch with me, and I would send maybe a letter or an email letter, asking for something, and they would send back to me.
Wow. Hopefully one day you'll get to do part of the book tour in Germany then.
Yeah, well, there's some of the historians there that are in the process of ordering the book for their museums right now.
Fantastic. That's great. I'm so glad that it's taken off, and congratulations on that. And
thank you.
I'm looking forward to getting into a PowerPoint presentation for our audience, because it's going to bring more of this to life for them, and they're going to see some amazing photos. And everyone who's tuned in, please remember that in the chat, I do have a link to purchase the book. So please keep that in mind going forward. Jack, without further ado, I think we should jump into our PowerPoint presentations you've provided for us, and thank you for doing so.
No problem.
So we have our title slide, which we will progress through here, because I think a lot of people are going to know what this next photo is. So Jack, take it away, my friend.
I call this a doorway of heroism. This is, as you can see on the picture on the slide, it's 20 Marzelstein, Cologne, Germany, which is the address of not only his store, which sold sleeping things, beds, and blankets and so forth for beds, pillows, whatever. But above the store was the apartment, actually stories of living space for the family. And so this is actually the picture that is in numerous museums around Germany. That is Uncle Richard standing in the doorway of his store wearing the medal that he got as a hero in the German army for World War I. It's on April 1st of 1933, which was the first official action by this Nazi government. They took power on January 30th of 33, and this was their first official action against the Jewish people in Germany. And all of the stores owned by German Jews had SA soldiers standing by those stores. And Uncle Richard was the only Jewish person in the city of Cologne to stand in the doorway and protest against the Nazis. And he did it not just because he was standing up for the Jewish people, and he cared so deeply, of course, about the Jewish people that he was part of, but he was also a member of the SDP, the Social Democratic Party. And the Social Democratic Party of the Weimar Republic stood up for civil rights. And he actually said to everybody in his family and his friends leading up to April 1st of 1933, I cannot be silent. I have to stand up for civil rights.
Wow. Wow. This is the photo that's on the cover of the book, and it's obvious why it is. It's really a defining moment in your family history, but also in German history, really. I mean, this is an amazing feat for this man.
Yes. And the shock for me was in 2013 when my wife and I were in Berlin, Germany, just to have part of our vacation there. And we went to the Jewish Museum, and we had been told by a family member that there was a picture of Uncle Richard, this picture of Uncle Richard was in there somewhere. And most of the pictures that we saw of Jews that were part of the museum were tiny little pictures, that you looked in a little something to see. Well, right. In the part of the museum that started on the Holocaust era, there was a huge version of this picture along with the pamphlet that he wrote against the Nazis. And I was so shocked at how large it was and how important the museum made it that I just stood there for a long time, just staring at it with my mouth open, kind of like this. So.
Right. Yeah. What's it like seeing that, Jack, personally for you, to know that your grandfather is blown up to this scale, and it's a kind of like a description of defiance to the fascism that overpowered that nation at that time?
Well, back in 2013, when I saw, this picture in the museum and realized that the folks in Germany were looking at it this way, that blew me away. I had known about Uncle Richard protesting since I was about 13 years old, because that's when I actually saw the picture for the first time. It was just after Uncle Richard had passed away, and I was asking Dad about this picture, and then he finally explained to me about the protest and what that was about, and he had started to tell me a little bit more about Uncle Richard than I would had known. So when I saw the picture in Germany, it blew me away, and it made me realize what we all have to stand for. And actually, this picture has been part of a frame of Uncle Richard's things that have been in my office for years. And as a rabbi in a congregation, whenever I would start to think, gee, I'm having a problem with something, I would look at this picture of Uncle Richard and say, you know what? He had a much bigger problem than anything I'm ever going to face. So I might as well not be worried about what I'm facing.
It puts it in perspective.
It put it in wonderful perspective.
Yes, indeed.
Well, that's me as a 6-year-old when we lived in Fairmont, West Virginia. And because of something that had happened in the family, my dad's mother, Uncle Richard's sister, had passed away. And Uncle Richard came down. He lived in Allentown, Pennsylvania at that time. And he came down to visit us and to kind of, be with us at this kind of sad time. But Uncle Richard loved to take me, and a little bit later when my younger brother got older, take us out on walks and do funny stories with us and just do fun things with us. And so he came down, and this is just a little bit after he came down, and Dad wanted to get a picture of him and me together. And so he took this picture on my swing set. So that was me and Uncle Richard. Uncle Richard was the legal guardian of my dad since my dad was about 2.5 years old. And he looked at Dad as his son, and he looked at my brother and I as his grandchildren.
What was it like with him in that you said to me offline, he said he never spoke about this kind of stuff. And what was it like? Was he just like, the average grandfather, if you will, where he's just, he's there if you need him, and there's nothing else to his story. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's just
he would not ever mention anything about the Holocaust or mention about the suffering in Germany. He just wanted to be with my brother and I and have fun with us, and just be a fun grandpa. That's all he was interested in. Although I will also add that he was concerned that if I wasn't eating properly, he would try to tell me how I should eat properly, that I should be eating vegetables too, and not refusing to eat vegetables as well. So that was his approach. I usually just had a great time with him. He would do funny things. For example, we would be walking somewhere and he would stop and he'd go, "I smell money." And what he had done is he had dropped coins on the ground where we were walking, and he wanted me to start to look for it. And then I'd say, "Oh, I found a nickel." And he'd go, "Well, you keep it. You found it. That's good. I smelled it." So.
Wow. Well, as someone who was in the U.S. Army at 43, he must have been eating right, because he had to be in good shape to do that.
He was in good shape. Absolutely. This is a picture of Uncle Richard and my dad, actually right at the end of the war. Both of them had gotten words from a sister of Uncle Richard's that they had not been able to hear from for a few years. She had married a Catholic man, which enabled them to escape Germany in 1939 and hide in Brussels, Belgium. And both of them actually ended up going up to visit them and find them at the same time, right at the end of the war. And so this is a picture of the two of them surprisingly being with each other in Belgium, in Brussels, Belgium, and that with this family that they found was still alive and doing well, and it made them very happy.
So Uncle Richard didn't talk about his service. Did your dad talk about his?
Yes, when I was about 8 years old, Dad and I were taking a father-son vacation together, and we were actually going from Fairmont, West Virginia, up to a place in Canada. And while we were driving, because it was a long drive, Dad was telling me stories of his being in the Army in World War II, because I loved studying things about World War II. I used to always watch the TV show Combat. And so that's the sort of thing that I really enjoyed. And Dad was telling me the stories. And then all of a sudden he stopped telling about himself. And he said, "Oh, and you need to know that Uncle Richard was actually a hero in World War II." And he told me the story of Uncle Richard. And that was the first time I had heard it.
Wow. Do you want to mention about your father's service that you said you gave me a great story that I've never heard.
Yes. Well, Dad, of course, as well as Uncle Richard, wanted to fight against the Nazis. And Dad was put into the American Army, at least for training in the American Army, towards the end of 1943, when he was old enough to do it. And what he did, though, is when he learned that his division was going to be sent against the Japanese and not against the Germans, what he did is he found a way to get honorably dismissed from the Army because he had flat feet, and they used that as a health reason to dismiss him. And then what he did is he volunteered again a number of months later and trained for a division that ended up going to fight against the Germans, and in fact went over and began the battle in their part in the battle late September of 1944.
That's amazing, because I love that story, because that's the first for myself that I've ever heard a story like that. I don't know if anyone in the audience has, but that's just a great story. Let's see. There we go.
Okay. That is the house that Uncle Richard was born in on February 22nd of 1899. Now, since we're looking at February 22nd, I will add that February 22nd, and everybody needs to know this, that was George Washington's birthday. So I will say that when Uncle Richard made it to America in 1939, and he found out sometime in the first few months he was here in New York, when he heard it the first time, he was so pleased because he was sharing a birthday with the first president of the United States, and the man who was, the general who ran the army that won the revolution against the English. So that made him so happy. But this house was built by his father and his father's brothers, some of his uncles, in Weilerswist. It actually is a mansion that area of Germany had not seen very many houses built like this at all. And it really is an indication of the success that the Stern family in the 19th century was having in business. And it was called Villa Stern.
Is Weilerswist near Cologne, or is that a long
It's
way?
about now a 30 to 40 minute drive from Cologne.
Okay.
That's the same mansion, but today I took that picture when I went to study in Germany, to do the research in Germany in September of 2019, and Weilerswist now owns that house. They use it for teaching children acting and singing and dancing, and the name of the house is Haus Heskamp, and so they own it, and that was I just was blown away by how much like the original picture this one actually looks.
Yeah, that's a beautiful structure.
Yeah,
amazing. I don't know why my PowerPoint doesn't want to advance. There we go.
Okay, so let me talk a little bit about being in Weilerswist, because the woman in the very middle is Anne Romberg, who is a cousin of mine that actually I got to meet for the first time ever. I didn't even know she existed until 2011, when the existing and surviving Romberg family actually found me and my brothers and my mom. Dad had already passed away. And I met Anne, who was born actually after the war, She was born in 48, and she ended up being a person that I was connected to, have been connected to very, very well. We become very close friends and cousins. And whenever I've done any research or work in Germany, because I did some on the Romberg family in 2013, she is terrific at speaking English, so she could do translation for me. She would drive me wherever I needed to go because she lives in Essen. That's not too far from Cologne.
Right.
And so she drove me down to Weilerswist. So the woman on my right side in the picture, that is the other side of Anne, is Dagmar Theisen, and she is the archivist in Weilerswist. And she was shocked when I sent her an email that I wanted to come and do research on Richard Stern, and I had a picture of the house. And she's the one who told me that the house is right next to their municipal offices where she works, wow. Basically. And so she was thrilled that I was coming. And when I got there, she then introduced me to the woman on Anne's, the other side of Anne. Mm-hmm. And behind her is her husband, but that's Helene. That's Helene Curtin. And Helene actually wrote a book about the history of the Jewish community in Weilerswist and in Freischheim and Erfstadt, which are three small towns that actually the Jews lived in, all three of them. And the three small towns are close together, not quite close enough to be a triple, town, but just a few minutes away from each other. And so, for example, there had to be a synagogue for just one, in one town that served all of the Jews in the three towns. So she wrote the history of that. And from her, I learned a pile about the Stern family going back to 1893, including Uncle Richard's great-grandpa, Seligman Stern, who moved to Weilerswist in 1820 from Bavaria. And so there was nothing that Dad knew about this or that my mom had ever heard of. So I learned so much that nobody in the family knew about the background of the Stern family going back so far. And those are the folks that taught me. And of course, they gave me a lot of information about Uncle Richard's dad and, what life was like for them in Weilerswist. And they also told me what year they moved from Weilerswist to Cologne. It's when Uncle Richard was 8 years old.
Wow. That's fantastic. Mm-hmm. Genealogy is amazing work.
Yeah.
It's
fantastic. Oh, yeah. Yes. Well, and this just shows, right. This shows the list of the family. Seligman Stern, you can see, born in 1793, and then his son Michael Stern, who was my Uncle Richard's grandpa, and Michael Stern, his grandpa, died when Uncle Stern was about 14 years old, and when Dad was born, Uncle Richard had Dad named for his grandpa in terms of a Hebrew name. So Dad's Hebrew name was Michael, which is the Hebrew version of Michael. And then, of course, Marcus Stern is Uncle Richard's dad. You can see he was born in 1861, and he married Elise. And of course, Uncle Richard, it shows when he was born again as well. Mm. This is the blueprint and a photo of the synagogue that Seligman Stern had built right by his house in Freischheim in the 1840s. And that actually shows, and the book talks a lot about this for one chapter, about how Seligman Stern did everything he could to really build and set up the Jewish community in Weilerswist, Freischheim, and Erfstadt. Okay, this is a special posting. The House Heskamp is, of course, what the Villa Stern became known as. Okay, but the people who worked with me in Weilerswist, that is Helene and Dagmar, they decided they were going to push the town's council to change the name from Haus Heskamp, which it's been for decades and decades, back to Villa Stern. Well, they felt that they couldn't, the town's council felt they couldn't change the name, but they wanted to honor him, honor Uncle Richard. So they put this up to honor Uncle Richard. So the next day, I went back to work in Cologne, Germany. And the first place that I visited and worked with is Elde House Museum, which is a museum that gives the history of the Nazi Party in Cologne, Germany, and the area around Cologne. And part of what they show is things that happened to the Jewish people. Now, of course, the museum goes into far other things than just about the Jewish people. So, but one segment of the museum is about the Jewish people. So the woman that I'm being photoed here with is Berthe Klarzak, and she is a historian that is in charge of a number of things at the museum. And by the way, the museum is in a prison that was run by the SS for the chunk of the 1930s, the later part of the 1930s, and in through the war. So let's talk about the three pictures in there. Of course, the middle one is the picture that is the front of the book and that we showed a little earlier. The one closer to my head is a picture of the pamphlet that Uncle Richard wrote and had printed that he passed out to any German running by or walking by his store on April 1st of 1933. That was part of his protest against the Nazis. And what the pamphlet talks about is because so many Jews, 100,000 Jews, worked in the German army in World War I, 30,000 got at least some level of medal, and 12,000 were killed. And he mentions the 12,000 being killed. And he said, how can you be against the Jews if we've been so patriotic to Germany? And of course, he condemns the Nazi leaders like Hitler and so forth. And so that's that picture. Now, the picture right behind Berthe's head is a picture of two Jewish men who own a store, and that they were forced by the Nazi army of SA soldiers to carry signs in the streets of Cologne that say that all Germans should boycott Jewish businesses. And how sad is it that Jewish store owners were forced to carry those signs about Germans boycotting Jewish businesses? Well, what I learned a little bit later from the person who was introduced to me by the woman who runs education at the Runestross Synagogue, he wrote a book about a family called the Katz family. And the reason I was interested in a book about the Katz family, and this was a German fellow who wrote it, is because the Katz family were a whole bunch of cousins of the Stern family, because Uncle Richard's first cousin married into their family. And so the two families became families and became very close to each other, to the point where one of the Katz people, a child at that point who was a little bit older than Dad, but not much older than Dad, made it to London in 1938. After the war, he and Dad were always in contact and would visit each other either here in the United States or over there in London. And they stayed in contact and felt close to each other until both died. But so it turns out that the two men in this picture are from the Katz family. And that was such a shock to me that both of the key pictures in the Elde House Museum are from my family.
Yeah, that's incredible. The one thing that I found fascinating when I was studying some of the German army during the First World War was, as far as what they considered religious affiliation, was that per capita, the Jewish population served in greater numbers per capita than any other religious sect, if that they said sect or they said religious affiliation at the time, meaning that the Protestants serve less in less numbers than those of Jewish faith. Catholics serve less than in Jewish faith. You're more likely to see those of service in the Jewish faith than you were anywhere else. And then you see this transpiring, which leads to this pamphlet that your uncle is handing out, and is also a form of resistance.
Yes, indeed.
It showcases the different forms of resistance. The one is him in the doorway, face to face, if you will. He's showing himself and saying, "This is me resisting," but he's also has text resistance, and he's passing out these pamphlets, which is just an amazing thing, because when we think of resistance to something, we often just go directly to violence, and there's so many different forms of resistance.
Absolutely. And I think that the kind of resistance that Uncle Richard did in this case is a model for how we should act against bad things that may be happening in our country now. I mean, why in the world should we be violent? What we should do is the kind of resistance that he did. It's a model for us. Absolutely.
Right.
That's the Runestross Synagogue in 1938. It was very badly damaged and not completely destroyed. I mean, the outside was still kind of there, but it had a lot of destruction to it, including the sanctuary and so forth. And so it was rebuilt, of course, after the war. It was pretty much the largest synagogue or one of the largest synagogues in Cologne before the war. And it became the largest synagogue that's in Cologne these days. And that, of course, is the synagogue that my family belonged to when they lived in Cologne. And that is the place where Esther Bugeva, who gave me so much information and introduced me to Michael Weiten, the man who wrote the book about the Katz family. Oh, and in that synagogue, yes, when you go to walk through it now, of course they take you on a tour of the history of Jews in Germany, of Jews in Cologne. And of course, the picture of Uncle Richard standing in the doorway of his store protesting is the first picture you see in that part of the synagogue.
Is in this photo, is the damage to this structure from Kristallnacht?
The damage to this, yes, was from Kristallnacht. And in fact, my dad was forced to be one of the teenagers to go and clean things up at that synagogue. Of course, no German was allowed to clean up the dirty things and the smashed windows or the destroyed Torah Ark. Those are things that teenagers like my dad had to do.
Wow.
That is the service booklet of Uncle Richard's from World War I. And this shows all of the battles that he participated in. He was drafted in June of 1917. And at that point, a lot of Germans felt that the war was going to be lost. They already felt bad about the way the war was going. And so when Uncle Richard was drafted, he felt that he was a patriotic German and he had to do the best that he could. And so he worked as hard as he could, for his country, even though the feeling was that it was not going to be a successful war at this point. And in fact, he was involved in some very, very serious and hard offensive attempts during the last part of the war, starting in February of 1918. And the worst ones came in July of 1918. And in fact, he had to work he was in a company as a machine gunner. And so he was, of course, up front for a lot of the battles. And all of this was translated for me by friends of my cousin, Anne Romberg, Margaret and Franz Diesen. They are actually two historians who are friends of my cousin. And they actually translated the entire booklet for me and told me things about World War I and really gave me what I needed to know.
Wow. Yeah, so everyone watching and looking at that document, remember, he's taken into service in 1917, and these are the battles he's in from 1917 till November of 1918.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine those who are in from 1915. As Jack pointed out to me beforehand, his brother had been in since 1914, Jack?
Yes, his brother Heinrich, actually. Heinrich volunteered. He was one of the large number of Jews when the war broke out to volunteer on August 4th of 1918. And one of the reasons a lot of Jews volunteered that day is because Wilhelm, Kaiser Wilhelm, the king, the emperor of Germany at that point, made a statement on August the 4th of 1914 that nobody should be persecuted against. Everybody should be treated equal. And he meant that Jews and people that were not Christian should be treated just like all other Germans. And so many Jews were so grateful for what Kaiser Wilhelm stated that they volunteered. And Uncle Richard's older brother, Heinrich, was one of those Jews who volunteered on August the 4th of 1914, as opposed to Uncle Richard being drafted in June of 1917.
Wow. That's such a stark contrast to someone like Tsar Nicholas at the time, who's purging the Jewish people. And here's the Kaiser saying, equality and stuff and equal treatment. That's amazing.
These are two of a series of pictures and things that were in a frame that I've had in my office for decades. And like I mentioned, the picture of Uncle Richard protesting is one of the pictures in that frame. These two are other important pictures. The one, of course, is him in the German army, as you can see from the what's written right below the picture. And the other picture is just after he became a sergeant in the American Army, which was after he won the Silver Star for doing the incredible heroic action that he did on January 6th of 1944 for the 48th Engineering Battalion, which is where he was put into when he volunteered for the American Army. And his job was generally to be one of the machine gunners protecting the engineers as they did their building work. But in a battle in Italy, it was the first set of battles that this battalion was assigned to. There were so many casualties to the American Army in Italy at that series of battles that the engineering battalion was forced to actually become infantry. And so his company, he was in Company A, went to the top of a mountain and got surrounded by German machine gunners. And what Uncle Richard did is stood up in the line of battle, in the line of shooting, and actually talked to the German machine gunners in German. And the first time he failed and had to, be pulled down so that he'd be protected, but he did it again, and he got them to surrender to the American company.
Wow.
So the one is a certificate of the medal that he got from the German Army, which was the Iron Cross of Second Class. The Iron Cross of Second Class was given to anybody. What you had to do if you were to get that is you had to do at least one brave action, courageous action that was beyond what was required by the German Army. So he earned that from the German Army. Clearly, he did brave action as one of the machine gunners. And of course, the other piece there is not only the Silver Star that he got, that I ended up getting, but also the letter written to him by General Mark Clark, who was second in command to Eisenhower during World War II in Europe.
Were these documents in those boxes that you saved from being thrown out, or were these found later?
No, actually, both of those Dad had for a long time. And when I was ordained as rabbi, Dad put together the frame for me that included all the pictures and these certificates and the medal.
Wow, amazing.
And this is a sad ending to the war. One is, of course, a pile of people that was found dead by the division that Uncle Richard's engineering battalion was part of in the last 10 months or so of the war. That division liberated Dachau, which is, of course, one of the concentration camps. So that's a picture of a pile of the dead Jews that they found there. The other picture is when Uncle Richard went back to Cologne when the war was done to start to find any information he could do about any family members that might still be alive or what happened to them. And he felt that if he went back to Cologne, he was still, of course, in the American Army. This is, when he went back to Cologne, it was in April and May of 1945. And he felt he could talk to the people who led Cologne, who were in the municipality of Cologne, and see what information they had. But one of the things he saw was the street that his store and living place was on. That's 20 Marselstein in Cologne. And he saw that it was completely destroyed by all the bombing by American bombers and English bombers. So the saddest part to Uncle Richard, while of course, he might have been disappointed to see that the place that he had lived in and had worked in while he lived in Germany, he might have been sad that it was destroyed. What made him far more sad was that the only living family members that he could find were the ones I talked about in Brussels, Belgium. He learned that his oldest brother, Heinrich, had been taken to Auschwitz along with his wife and his daughter, and they were killed in Auschwitz.
Wow. This leads to the fact of why he didn't really want to talk about it when he sees this, and especially when he sees his old home place gone and everything else as well.
I would agree that what he had to see. Well, he wrote to Dad. He wrote a letter to Dad about this time. Well, especially right after he saw the pile of deaths in Dachau. Mm-hmm. What he wrote to Dad was that they should remember the tragedies so that they can understand why it was so important for them to serve in the American Army against the German Nazis. Mm-hmm. He just stressed that, and that should never, ever be forgotten. And in fact, to this very day, this is the type of thing that should never be forgotten. We should always understand the history of what happened here. Absolutely.
Was there a point, Jack, in writing this book where sometimes emotionally you had to step back away from it? Because sometimes when you come across these very heavy things, it can take a toll.
Well, yes, it became very emotional in certain spots because of learning some new things. Of course, there were piles of things that I had learned from Dad. I had read, well, Dad had for as long as he was alive since the war, he had copies and actual original, the original copies of newspaper articles about Uncle Richard when he won the Silver Star. So, that creates a lot of things that I did know. But when I was in Germany, for example, there were a lot of things that I learned that I didn't know. And as I got the translations of a lot of the letters that I needed to have help get translated, because many of the letters were not typed, but were handwritten in German. And I needed special help to get those translated. So it was really, really emotional when I would read some of those letters. about some of the things going on. So, for example, Uncle Richard caring about certain members of the family and what he tried to convince the family to do and how they should behave was very emotional, because it wasn't just about his going against the Nazis. It was about his caring that the family would handle itself in the right way, and that they would understand how difficult the world was at that point, and that they couldn't be fighting with each other, or they couldn't, be condemning each other or criticizing each other if something were to come up, but that they had to hang together and be together against what was going wrong in the world and support each other. Mm-hmm. My father felt that because my father knew all of the members of the family, of course, going back then, and a number of them did make it to America, and he felt, and I read this in actually a poem that he wrote about Uncle Richard in 1949. Uncle Richard finally was able to get married in 1949 when he was 50 years old. And Dad wrote a poem that talked about Uncle Richard being the finest person in the family in terms of the approach that he took to the other family members, to friends, to try and keep people together, to try and create a good feeling among everybody.
That goes back to the pamphlets. Really.
Yes.
He's an organizer.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Absolutely.
That's incredible. Do any of those pamphlets survive? Any of those at all? I mean,
I have two actual copies. One of which is actually in my notebook that I have everything stored in, but I have it at our place in Florida. Right. And the other one I actually have sent for just a temporary time to a new Jewish museum that is being put together in Cologne, Germany. I've had talks with them, and they want to have Uncle Richard's story be part of when they first opened to the public. So they asked what I could send, and since I had a second version, of that pamphlet, I sent one to them.
That's awesome. I'm glad they survived, because it's one thing, that it's going to be destroyed by the Nazis if they find it, and it's another thing, again, going back to this idea of what is resistance at that time and then going forward. It's a really interesting pamphlet concerning that, which is a great history in itself.
Indeed, and when you read the book, I have a lot of the translation of the pamphlet in the chapter about his protesting against the Nazis, and in that chapter I also teach how it was that Hitler took power.
Mm-hmm. So it looks like a lot of the museums, especially in Germany, are already, I guess, formulating the idea of his legacy. Through this book and through this text, how do you want his legacy to be shaped? What would you like to see it become?
Well, what I really want it to become is something that people read about and understand, that when things get tough in the country, there is a proper way to stand up, and there is a proper way to devote yourself, to how you act. And if actually being part of the military is something that needs to be done to make the right thing happen, that may be something you have to do. But it may just be standing up for the right approach of politics. And I'm not talking about a particular political party right now. I'm saying about, though, that things can go bad, and you have to be willing to stand up for what is right and helpful to the bulk of people, not what is just for yourself. And that's the point that Uncle Richard was trying to make with everything that he was doing, is that the real point isn't just about yourself. It's about what you do to help the community, to help the people that you're connected to. It can't just be about yourself.
Right. Yeah, and that immediately makes me go back to him standing in that door and handing those papers out. Yeah, that's exactly the same thing. He's not thinking of himself. He's thinking of the community.
The way he thought of himself is that he could actually get the protesting done because he had been a decorated German soldier, and that he could stand up and say things on behalf of the Jewish people and say things on behalf of the Weimar Republic, and stand up for what is the proper way for people to act and the proper actions to be taken.
Yes, indeed. Everyone, I put a link in the comment section 2 or 3 times now to the book, and I would love for you to head on over and purchase a copy of A Doorway to Heroism, a decorated German Jewish soldier who became an American hero. It's a fantastic work. Thank you, Rabbi Romberg, for writing this. It's awesome, and I'm hoping that a lot of people read it and enjoy it.
Well, I thank you for having me on the podcast. I very, very deeply appreciate having the chance to do this with you.
Absolutely. I know that Yom Kippur is coming up, so please have a meaningful Yom Kippur.
Thank you so much.
And everyone else, please be safe, be well. Please go grab your copy now. Make sure that you check in, because maybe Rabbi Romberg will be coming to your area on the book tour. Please check that out as well, because hopefully soon we'll be going back to in-person events, and we can all be together and share these experiences and stories together once again. So thank you, everyone, for being with us this evening. It is greatly appreciated. We hope you have a great night. Be safe, and we will talk with you soon.